Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and with me, as always, is my star-studded co-host, Caleb. Caleb, I pulled that one right out of my butt because I didn't prepare.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm too busy laughing at you being all handsy with your microphone when you said greetings.
I am handsy, that is true.
Star-studded, handsy. We're
Yeah.
quite the collection.
Yes, we're ready to go. So we're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, who are we talking to today?
Yeah, it's friends of yours from college, and then I got to know them because I got to know a lot of your friends in college. But Katie and Matt joined us to talk about their experience in youth group and kind of the whole point of the show, their journey after that youth group experience and how it's impacted their lives and what's changed and what's the same and all those things.
Yeah, they're really thoughtful people and had taken faith seriously for some of their life, and it's interesting to hear kind of how that propelled them into where they're at now. And we just really appreciate the honesty of being willing to open up about some of that stuff because it's not all rosy, and that's fine. We
Yep.
don't need these stories to be rosy all the time. They can just be kind of the honest narration of what people have gone through. So I really stuck to what Matt talked about, holding on to a kernel of what was real.
Yep.
And even though some of the outer rings beyond that have changed for him, he still kind of focuses on the kernel of what was true for him back during that time.
Yeah. You said the idea that they had held on to, or they had held faith as important for part of their life, and I would argue that both of them, and you'll hear about their journey. I think the discussion of faith and the idea of faith and what faith can mean still seems important to them, even if it's changed. Like they are not taking this discussion and these decisions lightly. That it's not just
True.
something that was important. I think even now, if you would have a discussion, this is me projecting a little, but if you would have a discussion with them about faith, they are taking it very, very seriously, even now, even though it may have changed for them or
Hmm.
those differences. So I think it's not just like a thing that they may have left behind or are still involved in, but it feels like something that they're engaging with on a seriousness that I think helps hopefully people understand when those things change. It doesn't mean that somebody just got bored with it or just decided
Right.
I want to leave it behind. Like, now there's a seriousness that I think kind of puts a lot of church goers to shame, in my opinion.
Oh, hot take.
Hot
But
take. I've
their
said too
honesty
much.
is we are trying to keep this intro short. It
Yeah,
is a
my
long
bad. I'm
episode.
just going
So,
on.
jeez. But no, their honesty was refreshing,
Yeah.
and I've known Matt and Katie for a long time, and we had a great discussion. Of course, music came up. Matt's a musician,
Yeah.
so hang in there towards the end, where he talks about his own musical experience, making music himself, and where to check him out. Overall, I was really appreciative that they were willing to check. So I know that they're both very thoughtful about this subject. So we ended up with a great conversation. So.
Yep. Totally agree.
Anyway, we of course thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoy.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
All right, we are joined this afternoon by my good friends and soon to be your good friends, Matt and Katie. Matt and Katie, thank you very much for joining us. How you doing?
Great.
We're
Thanks for
doing,
having us.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We really appreciate you jumping on. As we go into more conversations with people who didn't go to Five Oaks, we reached out to people we know who did go to youth group in high school around the same time as us and wanted to have the same conversations with them. And so, full disclosure, Matt and Katie and I are good friends, and we went to college together for basically the same amount of time, same years. Well, at least Matt and I didn't know each other great in college, but after college became really close. So, this is not a situation where I haven't seen you in decades. This is a situation where I think Matt, I saw you a couple weeks ago. So,
Hmm.
um, we do see each other frequently, but this conversation of faith and Christianity and youth group does come up often between us because I know you both have a history there. So feel free, just kind of give us an introduction to your youth faith life. You know, what was that like? How did you participate?
I'll let Katie start.
Okay. So I went to the same church since birth, Our Redeemer Lutheran Church on the east side of St. Paul. Um, just a small community church and ELCA Lutheran, just very inoffensive, like basic Lutheran church. Nothing too exciting going on there. It was like the same families kind of for decades. So grew up around the same kids, and there weren't a ton of us because it was a fairly small community, but it was kind of a second home to me, I guess, because I spent so much time there growing up. So I did kind of hit I'd say the high point of ORLC's youth group life, because we got a really great youth pastor in right as I was coming into high school, and he left shortly after I graduated or right around then. So it
Mm,
was sort of like peak youth group in the peak 90s era, and we had a blast. Um, and I think after that, they struggled to get another youth pastor in who stuck around for a long time. Um,
mhm.
so yeah, I don't really know what it's like there these days, but we had a great time in the 90s. So
That's
We did.
interesting. That's interesting because the youth group model was not just an evangelical thing; it was starting to like infiltrate other denominations.
yeah.
So.
So the history of my involvement in Christianity, I kind of want to circle back and start there because it does
Hmm.
inform my youth group experience.
Hmm.
Like my dad was a minister, um, was trained in Missouri, so I lived in Missouri for a short while before we moved back to Sweden. I'm originally from Sweden, and then in Sweden they've got a national religion which is Lutheranism. So the idea of my dad going over there was to create like a more evangelical, like alive kind of
Mm.
and I use alive in quotation marks, alive uh, church. So these were home churches, or they were very small churches that you would establish. People would meet in their homes, or you would meet in. There are a lot of like community centers in Sweden that you can use for free. So if the church
Mm.
got a little bit bigger, you could just on Sundays you could, check out the community center and use that. Um, so these were not official churches. They were just kind of like established, like evangelical, um, and some of my earliest experiences is going to like church revivals where people are,
Mm.
it's just a cacophony of people speaking in tongues and people being slain in the spirit, falling over on stage and that kind of stuff. And then we eventually moved to Duluth, where I went to a Christian school for a year in fifth grade. Um, Not the best experience, but that's another story. And then moved to Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, I tried to connect with the youth group, but we had mega churches down there. So I'm like Rhema Church, which maybe some people are familiar with, was literally like a couple blocks away from our home.
Mm.
And I tried to connect there, and I never felt invited or particularly welcome because it was just so big and overwhelming. And um, there was a different kind of youth group experience there. So this is middle school that I'm talking about. And so at the end of middle school, eighth grade, moved back to St. Paul. I went to this church. It's still there, and I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's on White Bear Avenue.
The
Um,
little one or the big
the
one?
little one.
I
Yeah,
don't
I went
remember
to
what
the
that
big
was
one
called.
too. That's right. Um, I basically what I'm trying to explain is a lot of church hopping.
Yeah.
Some of them had good youth groups, or some of them I had youth groups that I could connect to, others did not. And so eventually, even though like when Katie and I became friends, she invited me into her youth group. And because it was a smaller group, it was easier to connect with people. And then some of those people, went to the same school as her. I had moved on to another school. Um, and so even though my parents were going to one church, I stuck to the youth group with Katie's youth group because it
Mm,
was smaller. Um, my parents went on to Woodland Hills Church,
hmm.
which is a great church, I think, as far as churches go. But they were also in a transition phase where they didn't have a permanent home. So they were meeting at like Harding High School or Arlington. And so their youth group experience was much more like difficult to connect to. So I hooked in with Katie's youth group, even though I didn't normally go to that church at
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
And it was a great experience. Like we had a lot of fun, like Katie said, and it was the first time that I really felt, connected to people my age who were also in the same kind of stages of their faith.
Yeah, the smaller thing can do real well for a lot of people. There are, of course, now plenty of mega churches all around us, and we tried that a little bit, and it didn't work. Whether it was the Sunday school thing or the youth group thing, that kind of still persists, that large group, and that's just not my family experience. Obviously, it's yours too, but also I've talked to many families around here who were kind of like have tried the large church youth group experience, and while it's wild and fun and crazy, it's much harder to make a connection just due to the size.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So interesting that was your experience, so many years ago. So it sounds like both you kind of had that Christian home upbringing. Matt, you even dabbled in charismatic Christianity a little bit.
Yeah,
Sounds
quite a
like.
bit.
Interesting that was kind of part of it. Given, I wonder if do you think that was a Sweden thing, or do you think it was something your dad learned in training in Missouri?
Uh, so he was Methodist, I think, is what his background was
Hmm.
from like my grandma. But the charismatic thing, it was an international movement. And so my dad, my uncle had moved over to Sweden to start like basically a Christian cult is what I would describe it now today. That's probably
Mm.
not how they would describe it at the time, but they all lived together in the same compound and they like would go around selling Bibles and stuff like that. So my dad actually, that's where he met my mom, is he moved over to go help his brother in Sweden.
Oh,
And so like they were already part of like that evangelical kind of yeah, like in Swedish it's called Livets Ord, which is like the living word or something like that is like the translation.
sure.
And so that was like a whole international evangelical movement that was kind of going on at that time, like in the 80s and late 70s and the 80s and even the 90s. So
Interesting. Interesting. I didn't know that's where your mom and dad connected, but if it's a separate movement, yeah, I can kind of see how it would feel cult like and you're all living in a commune. So, but interesting that that kind of filters into your history. Um, so you two having met, early on as kids and connecting in youth group, like you had that youth group experience together. How would you describe it? Like how would you describe your faith? What did that look like for you in the 90s?
I would say for me, it was kind of like in Lutheranism, you go through communion or not communion, confirmation, like sixth, seventh grade. So I had just come out of that process. It's a couple years of like you go to classes together with the same kids and talk a lot about your faith, and then have to make the like proclamation of your faith. So it was just kind of the natural progression for the church I grew up in. And so it was what was I wouldn't say expected of me, but it's just what
Hmm.
everyone did. So that's what I did. And then, like I said, I knew those same kids for a long time. And so then it just kind of morphed into, okay, we did confirmation, that's done, and now it turns into this other thing where we
Mhm.
are suddenly like high schoolers and have a lot more opportunities to do cool things. Like we were going to camp every summer and
Mission trips.
mission trips
Mm.
that got organized through our youth pastor, I think hooked us in with that, which was not a thing I think happened at my church before him, maybe.
Interesting.
Um, so I think for 4 years we went on mission trips through YWAM.
Oh
We
yeah,
went to
nice.
like the base in the mountains of Colorado for part of the week, which was just beautiful and amazing, and like prepared to go to Mexico. And then we went to Juarez, Mexico. Um, Matt came along on one of those, I
Yeah.
believe. I
Yeah.
went 4 times, I think.
Wow.
And did like skits and stuff. We went to like very poor areas of Juarez and, did uh, dug outhouses,
Yep.
painted churches, did
Mm.
all these service projects, which was really cool. And then did like outreach with the kids, like kids programs and stuff over there. So that was just like, um, yeah, youth group gave me all those opportunities that for like activities and traveling and stuff that I really wanted to do. And I really liked that about it.
Mhm. There's a little, Kayla, we've talked about this in the past, that everyone was reading the same playbook.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of different places were doing these things at the same time. And sounds like the pastor that came into your church kind of infused that into the group.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if they were all trained in the same way.
That idea of like out in Colorado before you go, like that probably even makes it feel like more intense, like almost like army-ish. I don't want to be
Yeah,
like crass, but
it's a
like
little like boot camp kind of.
yeah, I mean, which probably just I don't know that I could see that really enhancing the like making it feel even more real and more vibrant in a lot of ways because there's just like there's an intensity there that we never had that, Scott. We just jumped on a plane and
Oh,
flew off somewhere. That's really
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's cool. It probably was a real bonding experience.
we also drove for all of these or had a bus. So
Oh
like
my
it was
God.
an epic road trip. I think we were gone for like, I don't know, 10 days or
Yeah, it
something
was about 10
because we were in
days.
Oh my
Colorado for
gosh.
5 days and then Mexico and yeah. So it was a big part of the summer during high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the camp, they would, you would learn, they would teach you plays, things like that with like, so like the one I remember that I was Jesus. I had the part of Jesus
We had
in
the long
the,
hair, so
yeah, I
naturally.
had
Yeah,
long
of
hair.
course. I mean,
So like I was the King of Hearts or something like that was the name of the play. And it's
Mhm.
all with music and it was all silent, right? There's no words because but it was but you had to learn this part, right?
It was
Like
like a
mhm,
pantomime
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
mhm.
So like you had to learn this part to do that you would then perform in front of people a few times when you were down in Juarez.
See, I mean, okay, we did something similar.
Hmm. Yeah. I think something interesting for me coming from this small Lutheran church was we would go to events with other youth groups, and that was eye-opening for me to see other kinds of churches. And like your experience is from a much larger church with a much more organized youth group, and I did
Mhm.
not have exposure to that until we started kind of connecting with other churches. And then I was like, oh, these people are really intense. We're just like mine was very just ad hoc, homegrown,
Sure,
like hanging out together. It
sure.
was not organized at all.
It
And,
was
and yeah, everyone was again kind of trying to do the same thing in their own way.
Yeah.
yeah, it was an organized kind of chaos.
Yep.
That was fun. I'd say like for me, having grown up in that kind of Christian household, even through high school, I was pretty devout and cared a lot about doing the right thing, even while life throws curveball questions at you. You're trying to navigate the world, um, being sort of my journey was like, it was nice to connect with other Christian kids because I didn't know it like high school. I had a very different set of friends. Like I usually
Mm.
thought of myself as like quote unquote the example or whatever. Like that's
Mm.
kind of how my parents taught me to be. It's what they would tell me all the time. Like, you can't play Magic the Gathering. You need to be the example for other kids. I'm like, oh, come on.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, trying to figure out how to be a good person and love everyone where they're at, but also like be quote unquote what righteous or whatever. I don't whatever
Hmm.
that means. So it was that experience. But then like getting to go into like an environment where we're all on the same page or we're all coming, together to have fun together in a wholesome environment, you definitely felt like you were in the world but separate from it.
Oh.
That was the teaching that they really emphasized on us is be salt and light, be there, but don't do the same stuff. Because
Mm.
if you did the same stuff, you're not different. You're just the same as everyone else. You're not making a difference.
I think that's also around the time that, like, especially in the 90s, when music culture and other things really were emphasizing like a Christian version of music culture.
Hmm.
Because that's a big thing I remember. We always listened to like, Plank Eye, and, we were all listening to the same music together, but they're all like Christian versions of popular music,
Hmm.
and I remember really being enjoying like harder rock kind of music. And that was when like early Christian, like there was harder like rock versions of Christian music out there and stuff like that. So you get into like Stavesaker. Um, I don't know. Like I started out with like Petra,
Yep.
that was my
Yeah.
big, I'd go to the library and check out and then tape those CDs
Yes.
Yeah.
until I could afford to buy my own.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big thing of why our youth group connected so well was a lot of us really enjoyed the same music.
Yeah,
We
we
got
would
Sure.
to
go to the same
we go to
concerts.
the New Union all the time
Yeah.
Yeah.
and go see concerts and um yeah, we had just all really liked the like alternative and rock music and that was a big part of how we connected.
And I think that was really important and why we all connected so well is because the youth pastor, he was so youthful himself and like his energy, like he had it, he
Hmm.
brought like a childlike energy to it that was just fun and wholesome. And he was really into the music, really into the same kind of music that we were. And that just made it so much easier to connect because I remember another youth pastor coming in and he was much older and did not know how to connect with kids at all. Like he got very frustrated because he like didn't know what he was doing wrong. And we're like, you're just not cool, dude.
It's,
Like, how do you say like
that's
that
part of
sounds
it.
mean, but
Yeah.
like it's like as a kid, you almost felt embarrassed for the guy because you're like
Yeah.
you're trying, but man, are you
It
like
was cringe.
it was
Yeah. I was
cringe.
just gonna
That's
say,
that's
sounds
that's a
pretty
good way of
cringe.
putting it.
Yeah. And I think Steve, our youth pastor, he was pretty fresh out of college. He was maybe like 23 or 24 when he came on. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, he was just more like we were all just friends, but he was also our mentor. And we still had, good conversations and talked a lot about faith and everything.
Hmm.
But he also could just hang,
Yeah.
we just had a lot of fun together.
I think Caleb, our youth pastor John, was basically the same. He came right out of Northwestern College with a youth ministry degree and was like ready
Hmm.
to go.
Yep.
And that and that energy really translated, and I know for a lot of people, if they did have a Lutheran experience like you did, Katie, that wasn't often the case. Like it was kind of, you know,
Hmm.
stifled and well, not even cringe, but just kind of like not even existent. So
Yeah.
Like dry,
um,
maybe.
yeah, dry. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. We probably went to New Union shows and
Oh,
just didn't
I'm
even know
sure.
it, right? We were
Hmm.
I'm
there at the
sure.
same time.
Yep.
Matt, I'll share a quick story about because I know music's really important to you still. Um, when we were at college, they had KSTO, the radio station, and you had a radio show, and you
Hmm.
like it was a little flyers on the cafeteria tables, and one of the songs you highlighted that you were going to play was a Flowery song by Five Iron Frenzy, and I was like, someone else knows this band because all the people I had met that were Christians there, like they didn't like five. If they knew Five Iron at the least, they just didn't like them. I was like,
Yeah.
somebody respects this. I was like, I have to find out who this person is.
That's
So
awesome.
Well, let's wrap up kind of the conversation about 90s youth group, and then we can talk about how things have changed. But in general, what did you love about it? What are some vivid memories that you have, or maybe some teaching moments that still resonate or are still with you today?
I mean, for me, it was just very much gave me a sense of belonging because I had friends in high school that was fine, but I was never like a popular kid. I was kind of and felt a little outcast. So I think that just was a way to develop a really good group of friends with the same interests. And like I said, it just gave me a lot of opportunities to do cool and wacky things that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
Mhm. Great, Matt. How about you?
Yeah, I would say kind of a similar answer in that it was my first opportunity to really connect with people, and have like a safe space. I felt like people, everyone was not just having fun, but everyone was being genuine,
Mm,
like everyone was had a chance to be themselves in this safe environment, because I do think that Steve really brought like a sense of the youth pastor really brought like a sense of community and belonging and kind of just like joy of being together and hanging out, even if whether we're talking about serious matters or we're just joking around and being goofy, both were okay, and both were equally like that. Spending that time together was as important as the topic or whatever you were talking about.
good on you, Steve. Nice work. Um, well, let's just kind of talk about what's happened in the last 30-ish years, plus minus. Um, how does it comparatively, what's it like now compared to what it was like back then? I mean, is it the same or have things changed? And if things have changed, then why?
Do you want me to go first or?
I could go first.
Okay. All right.
Okay, well, I mean, it's changed quite a bit for me because I am atheist, and that's been a progression over the past few decades, I'd say. But I think just coming out of high school, coming out of college, and just facing adulthood without that kind of system, got me thinking about things differently.
Hmm.
And in retrospect, I think a lot of what made me try so hard to be a Christian and stick to it, even when I wasn't really feeling it anymore, was that it did give me that sense of belonging and community. And that's hard to find as an adult.
Mm,
So, but I do believe I have found that community elsewhere. And that was like really eye-opening for me. That was like, oh, there
mm,
is a way to connect with other people on the same level and still do good things together and still just believe in the what am I trying to say?
The goodness of humanity.
Yeah, like
mm,
I don't feel any different about like believing in humanity and trying to leave the world a better place than I found it. I
mhm,
found that outside of Christianity as an adult.
mm,
And it's not any different in my head. It's still like everything I learned back then, I still take with me, but I don't find that in a church anymore.
mhm.
I just find it in other people. So yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot for me. And I did, after high school, I went to Bethel my freshman year of
That's
college.
right.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons I chose Bethel was that I wanted to keep that youth group feeling going. Like I thought I was going to find that same sense of community there, and I did not. So
Mm,
that's why I transferred to St. Olaf the
mhm.
Quite the
next
opposite.
year. Quite the opposite. I felt very much an outcast there, like
Hmm.
not accepted for who I was. So I did leave and go to St. Olaf and found I had a great time at St. Olaf. That was a much better fit for me. And I felt I had more opportunities there. So that was great. But yeah, it was just kind of this like I had such a good experience in youth group, and that was tied to my faith for me at the time. And then when that was no longer there, then I had to start thinking about things differently. And over time, I mean, it took me until my 30s to really feel comfortable thinking, no, actually, I no longer believe what I grew up taught to believe. And
Sure.
that's okay. And that doesn't change who I am as a person or how I relate to the world. So,
Sure. Sure. Thanks for that honest answer. I really appreciate that. Matt,
yeah.
how about you?
Sorry, I would just like to make one interesting observation. It's just an observation that like your community now is very heavily like involved with LGBTQ rights
Mhm.
and connections, and the church very much historically uh has not been okay with those people, you know.
Hmm.
And I would say like on that note, to answer your question, that has been a big struggle for me going back to high school. Um,
Mhm.
I had friends, you know, who were bi or whatever in high school and were struggling with it. And I was trying to be an empathetic, good person, and I was trying to lead them away from that.
Mm.
Yeah, like
Hmm.
I was trying to be like, well, you know, you're a really great person and blah blah blah, you know, you shouldn't be involved in this sin or whatever. And I was trying to be an honest, and this is what the church had taught me, right? Like I you know, I try to be read books and things and um
You just found that book the other day you had on the
yeah,
bookshelf.
I'll get to that in a second. Yes, because what I wanted to pivot from that is like I read a lot of theology, especially after college.
Hmm.
I really started diving deep into theology, read a ton of books. Like Greg Boyd was the pastor at Woodland
Yeah.
Hills that I went to. That's a church I went to. I volunteered there. I ran their soundboard. I did recording of their worship services that they then like, you know, printed to CD. I was heavily involved in church after college. Um, but I began to gradually drift away from organized church because it felt too insular, is the best way of putting it. I still really appreciate Greg Boyd. He was a really open person, but even with him, like I found some of the compromises he was making not in his faith, but in his like approach to other human beings. Like I couldn't meet him
Mm.
there. You know, like
Hmm.
it wasn't open enough for me, right? Like because I began realizing like how toxic some of the things that I was taught was not just to the LGBTQ community, but also to mental health, people struggling with mental health, people
Hmm.
struggling with poverty. You know, I was, you know, I lived in Oklahoma, like I said, the prosperity gospel was very much a thing there. You know, I saw a lot of hypocrisy um, coming from people thinking that they were doing the righteous thing. I'm using righteous in quotation marks.
Hmm.
But really what they're doing is just kicking people while they're down. Over and over and over again, I see that. I just see I've been observing with despair the terrible positions that quote unquote Christianity is taking in our political culture or our political world and culture in general, and how damaging it is to people, and how like I can't like again with all the knowledge and all the books I've read, like there's no sort of like equality going from Jesus to what positions are being held today and
Hmm.
how they're kicking people while they're down, you
Hmm.
know? Um, it's a power over, it's a reinforcement of the patriarchy as opposed to serving people. If you are not addressing the systemic issues and you're just band-aiding over it and then thinking that you're being righteous by like giving food to the poor, that's good. But you know, you continue to support the systems that keep people poor. Or what are you doing? You know.
Hmm.
Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent.
How
I
dare you?
a lot of thoughts. You know, I've thought about this a lot. I struggled with it a lot. And what I would say at the end of the day, I used to say that um, I still call myself Christian. And
Hmm.
I do think that this election broke me and that it's still just a label, right? It's a label, but that label can no longer apply to me because of, and again, I understand that Christianity is a wide spectrum of beliefs and systems. I'm not condemning everybody, but what I will say from, you know, when people hear Christian now, that is leaves a bitter taste in people's mouths.
Hmm.
What I will say is I do support, I do believe in, you know, Jesus Christ, and I do believe in what he said to serve people, but really what he said is just that. Like there's no room for judgment, and there's no room, for trying to make other people live by your faith when they don't have your faith, right? There's no room for that at all, in my mind. We have one job, and that is just, as human beings, is to be there for each other and to help each other and to make life better and to bring the rich down.
Mhm.
The rich.
Seriously. I mean, it's if you want to save people, you should unrich the rich, because Jesus did say that it's harder for a rich person to enter heaven than to get a camel through the eye of a needle. So if you want to, go out and save souls, you should unrich the rich.
Hmm.
It's
Anyway, I
it's
went off on a political tangent there. I'm sorry. It's all connected, right? Everything is connected. You can't dissect religion from culture, from
mhm.
philosophy, from politics. Like, I understand everything is connected, and to try to wall yourself away from the world and pretend that you are separate, it doesn't work.
Right. I'm surprised it took us this long to get to politics, frankly. What I hear you saying is like it's almost as if the foundational teachings of Christ are not compatible with a political system, or at least this political system that we have here, because there's a huge emphasis on those things, focusing on the least of these, or people who are different from you, or people who are outcasts. We in the sermon we went to this morning, or heard this morning at our church, they quoted Luke 4, and I pulled it up here just so I got it right. But he was quoting Jeremiah, I believe, and or Isaiah, one of the two prophets, and they said, Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, proclaim freedom to prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, and set the oppressed free. And they took those four types of people, the poor, the prisoner, the blind, and the oppressed, to mean like you internally, like you are spiritually poor, you are spiritually a prisoner. He's speaking about this spiritually to you as a person. And I'm like, yes, but also he's actually talking about the poor people.
Yeah.
He's actually talking about the oppressed, and how we're supposed to set them free. And there's very, very little room for that in certain political systems in this country that claim to be Christian, right? They're not operating on setting the oppressed free, or getting the poor, to helping them, like you said, Matt, to not only be fed, but also correct this system that might be helping keeping them down there. So I sympathize with that because it is hard to watch.
That's why I don't think it's a tangent. You're right. It is all connected. Like we've talked to a number of people who it's not a tangent because it's become so clear that what I was raised or what was taught to me in youth group just feels like now what I see feels so contradictory.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
I think it's not a tangent anymore. It's not, you're right. It's not outside of that. It's become so interconnected because people have wanted to make it interconnected. And then when you say how interconnected you've made your faith and your politics and like aligned with one side, that's disturbing to me. Then people are like, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. But like it's already done. Like
Yeah.
I'm not undoing it. You wanted to put it so coupled so tightly, and now you're mad at me because I'm feeling frustrated that it's it's so tightly coupled. So I don't think it's a tangent at all. I think it is the story of so many people over the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, 20
Yep.
years even. When I did attend Woodland Hills, after Matt and I got married for a few years, that was kind of my last church going experience was there. And I did appreciate Greg Boyd a lot, and I read some of his books, and he really got people thinking about it. But that was kind of the big thing for him at that time in like 2005-ish. I don't know.
2004, yeah,
Yeah,
ish.
Yep.
We're
was
run.
trying to separate, like, remember, we're supposed to separate church and state. And he wrote a book about it. He did a whole series of sermons about it over a period of time at the church about trying to separate those things. And it received such backlash that,
They lost a huge portion of their like 20% or something of the
yeah.
congregation
And I feel
left.
like that's about the time where things were getting so meshed together with like Christianity was becoming this politicized thing. I mean, it always has been, but like people were starting to reject that idea of separation of church and state, and kind of leaning into the where we've gone now, where it's just kind of doing the opposite of what Jesus said. So that was really interesting to me, and I really appreciated the like conversation he had about it back then. I very much agreed with him. So
Hmm. Yeah, when I was in seminary, which was around that time, 05, 06, 07-ish, he came to Bethel. I went to Bethel Seminary, and he
mhm.
came to Bethel and to talk about that book. Um, and Jim Wallace of Sojourners was there as well. And it was supposed to be like a debate per se, but they didn't have opposing opinions, but it was a really robust conversation. That place was packed, like
Oh,
literal standing room only out into the hallways and this was with students. And there was this feeling of like this is really swelling up to be a big issue. And I don't know, I wasn't really expecting it to be such an important thing. And all of a sudden, here we are, a bunch of 20-year-olds, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them wanting to hear what Greg Boyd has to say about it. And he was very well spoken and well educated about it. And to your point, I think pretty on point with how dangerous these things are when you combine them. So,
Yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't enough. He
well,
was kind of a lone voice out there for a long time.
yeah, well, and I haven't heard anything from him for a while, so who knows? Maybe it really just kind of sunk his career, so to speak. I'm sure he's doing fine, but um, yeah, he was a lone voice. You're right about that. But to Caleb's point, I think there are a lot of people more than we know who feel betrayed by what we've seen and heard over the last 10, 20 years, and culminating with what just happened. So it's a hard thing to reconcile. It's not. I think the struggle is real for a lot of people. We've talked about some things politically and otherwise, but just overarching, was there a certain event, maybe not the election or the 2016, 24 election, but was there a certain event? Was there a certain situation that happened where you're like, man, you know what? Things are not quite the same. Things are changing for me.
I think I've kind of touched on this, but it wasn't a certain event. It was just
Mm,
a life stage, I would say. Um, just kind of when the realities of adulthood hit, and you're like, okay, now what? Like you're grown out of all of the support systems you had growing up, and you have to figure things out on your own.
hmm.
I think that's where, and it was a long progression for me of like thinking about things, reading books, like trying church still, and just sort of even getting into my 40s to be able to say, like, comfortably say, no, I'm an atheist. I no longer believe this
Hmm.
that I grew up believing. Um, and like really being comfortable with that in my own head, even.
Sure. Matt, can you point to any other specific events?
No, because I'm a very thoughtful person. I like to think about things a lot. I like to read and take different perspectives and, incorporating philosophy, different types of religion. I even have a book on my shelf that's called Why Buddhism is True.
Hmm.
It's actually a really great book. Um, I've struggled a lot with depression and anxiety. And so that's been part of my journey too, is overcoming those things and just realizing how Christianity in some ways was really detrimental to my mental health, trying to figure out why. And, like I said, like it's just a lot of like thinking about things, observing the world, and going back to what you know is true. Like there's always this core kernel, right? This core, and then we have a tendency to build rings around it of like rituals and like, oh, now you have to do this thing,
Hmm.
but really at the end of the day there's a core truth, kernel of truth. And so I keep returning to that and being like, is it still true to me? Yes, it is. And so I try to grow I try to like always redirect myself back to that core and
Hmm.
then move from there. Like, how do we move forward with justice? Like, how do we move forward with how we treat other people and how we interact with the world? Like the Bible says, like, if you don't have love, you're nothing but a hollow gong, And so I try to approach everyone I meet and every interaction I have from that perspective. And yeah, it's not my job to save the world. I used to feel that way.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
I think it was very much stressed when you're growing up in youth group and stuff that like you are the light of the world and you need to go
Yeah.
out there and save souls. And every soul that isn't saved, oh, you could have, what if you had just said that one thing and it would have saved them for eternity? And I don't,
That,
I'll be honest, like I don't even know what eternity looks like anymore, but like,
that's a lot of pressure to put on a kid.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure,
Like
dude. For
like
sure.
it's a pressure cooker. But even as an adult, where you turn that idea into a political belief, and that's kind of where we end up with being like, oh, we need to ban LGBTQ rights because it's a sin, whatever. Like, anyway, I barely have, I have nothing but contempt for that idea.
Hmm.
That's what I was going to say earlier about the books. I was going through some of my old books and I pulled out this book, and I know I showed it to you, Scott, on our Discord. Um, but like, God Doesn't Believe in Atheists is the name of the book. And I just happened to flip through and I noticed one of the chapters was called what if the average girl knew this or something like that. I was like, that's a weird name for a chapter. So I started just browsing through it, and quickly, you come across the passage that says like, the biggest hoodwink that culture has ever, foisted on us is to say that like you're born homosexual. And I was like, oh, like this book is going into the fire, like that kind of that kind of mindset is so toxic. It's so bad for people and it's so bad for your spirit. Like, it's just bad. It's just really bad theology. And the fact that like we were all marinating in that stuff
Mhm.
coming up through the 90s, and how much bad teaching I've had to undo throughout my life to still retain this kernel of faith that I have.
Mm.
I've had to undo so much damage, so much damage. And that's what's really frustrating too, looking at the world that we live in and how people are told in their churches to vote a certain way, or their faith is on the line. I'm like, it's just so damaging. It's so toxic to the human spirit. It's so toxic to culture and so toxic to our communities.
Hmm.
It is pure poison. That's my observation. And I just rambled a bit, so I apologize.
No,
But
we love it.
yeah,
I love it.
I have opinions and thoughts and feelings about things. But again, like it goes back to like I think I get a lot of flack from people from other Christians that I've interacted with because they think that I'm some sort of monster, some sort of
Yep.
heretic, and they think that I don't know what I'm talking about. They judge me. They've been growing up or they've been fed a steady diet of Joe was it Elstein, no, or whatever.
Oh,
Joel Olstein.
Yeah,
yeah.
that guy. Or other mega pastors like them who are toxic, themselves preach hate from the pulpit, and they think that I'm the one who's the problem somehow. I'm like, no, hey,
Hmm.
I'm trying to help you, but if you don't want to listen, that's on you. That's not on me. So
Yeah.
I try to leave those conversations when you can tell that they're not trying to listen, they're trying to convert you.
Yeah.
So
Anything that smells or tastes or looks like us versus them is just
yeah.
so anti-Jesus to me. Like even in the
Mm-hmm.
political realm, yes, there's gonna be disagreements on how to do some of these things or some of these beliefs, but it really Christians have made it very, very much a part of how they talk about and to people is you're either on the right side or you're going to hell, the kind of thing. There's no
Mhm.
room for nuance, there's no room for conversation. And at worst, it just makes us enemies of each other. And there's nothing more anti-Christian to me than that.
Mm-hmm.
And for people that I know to just not be able to see and understand that and willingly partake in those types of conversations or belief systems, or at least not give people the room to express their difference of opinion, is like you said, Matt, it's toxic and it doesn't create community. It does the opposite, which a lot of people are comfortable with right with now because they can just live in their silo and they're fine.
Mm.
So I empathize with that. I'll get to kind of just my favorite questions here, which we've asked quite a bit, but we'll combine the two. What would your 18-year-old self say to your current day self and vice versa? Like what do you think your young self would say, and what advice would you give to yourself back then?
I always struggle with those questions.
Oops, sorry.
I mean, given everything I've talked about, I think I would just tell myself it's okay to not believe.
Mm,
Because I just grew up kind of going through the motions of it. And I really, really, really tried and really, really struggled with it. And at the end of the day, it was kind of the realization that like what I really want is community with other people and to like feel like I belong, but also feel like I can make other people feel like they belong. And
mhm,
um, I really grew up believing the only way to do that was through Christianity. And so it took a long time for me to realize that that was okay
yeah.
to not have that belief anymore. But yeah, also just keep being cool, Katie.
It's,
I,
of
I was
course.
gonna ask, do you, and I know this derails the question, so it gives Matt more time to think, about what he would say to his 18-year-old self. Do you think it would have been, you would have been able to do it? You talked about that community.
Mhm.
Do you think you would have been able to kind of accept that, like, I don't believe anymore if you hadn't found that community? Or do you think it would have just been something that would have, maybe you would have been able to accept it, but there wouldn't have been a place to find peace with it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think I would have just, it would have just been attrition without it being replaced by anything.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah, but
Hmm.
there's peace to it. Like I found peace with it, and that's like a really
mhm.
good way of putting it.
Matt, what do you think?
I'm struggling with the 18-year-old self, what he would say to me now. He might not recognize himself.
Hmm.
So there's that. What I would tell my 18-year-old self is like, you are about to go through some major depression and anxiety, and it's okay to get help right away.
Mm,
Don't fight it by yourself. That doesn't make you a weaker person, and it doesn't mean that you don't have faith by getting help. Like you just need help. And if you get help sooner, you're gonna just be happier.
hmm.
So it's a little bit of a depressing kind of a talk back because it took me forever to finally get the help I needed. And I will say that probably like my faith probably got in the way quite a bit of me getting help earlier. But like 18-year-old self would probably say, dude, you're old.
You're lame. You can't lead
Yeah.
this youth group. Matt, we've been friends for a long time, and I've watched you, handle your depression, anxiety, and be honest about it. Since it was inspiring to me to go talk to people at times when I needed to, and I think about that that topic in terms of what we were experiencing and learning in the 90s. It's frustrating sometimes how disingenuous the movement took things like that. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you just need to pray and it'll be fine, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's a sin issue. Maybe you're sinning somewhere you don't know about or whatever, and just pray, read your Bible harder. And there are lots of topics like that. I think sexuality is another one where they just simply weren't like honest about the whole thing,
Right.
And part of that is culturally too, right? There were plenty of people our parents' age, Christian or not, who are just simply not going to go to therapy. Like this is not a thing. I don't think that uh, a bit to what you said, Matt. Like what we were taught didn't help us try and better ourselves in that way, you know? And because it wasn't able to be honest with some of the things that were going around, they were just like, let's leave the world to itself. And we don't want to, be influenced by it. So we're not even going to take it mental health seriously, for instance. And now obviously it's a, in the very least, a much more recognized part of people's lives. And so good on you for pushing through and getting the help you need. So we've all been there. I shouldn't say we've all been there. I've been there. So, well,
I understand what you mean.
thank you. In general, we've been pushing you guys here this afternoon for a while. So thanks for sticking with us. But kind of summarizing, I know things have changed a lot for the two of you, but how do you think 90s youth group just simply contributes to who you are today, even though you've moved far, far away from it? Like, how do you think that still, Matt, you talked about holding on to that kernel of truth, that sort of thing. How in general do you think it just contributes to the person you are today?
I think it taught me a lot about having positive relationships with other people, um, and just kind of having a sense of playfulness about life.
Hmm.
Like I
Hmm.
said, we did, you all know you did too. You've talked about the wacky stuff you did in youth group. Like it was weird. And that was a lot of fun. And I think I've tried to keep that in my friendships as an adult too. And I think it was just like a really positive way to get through a tough time of life, which, high school's tough for a lot of people. So it was just created a very positive thing where it could have gone badly. Um, and so, and also, honestly, the music was pretty rad, and some of it I still listen to, and just kind of
Yeah.
being engulfed in that music culture too. Like we still listen to Stave Saker on the regular because they're
Hmm.
just awesome.
So
So
good.
um I still go to concerts all the time too. So I don't know. It just kind of set the stage for what life could look like, I think.
Excellent. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I think Katie put it pretty well. I definitely like the music thing was pretty big. I've been kind of a DJ, uh, making mixtapes and stuff going way back to high school and exploring music and finding good music. That was definitely harder, more challenging in when you're only looking at Christian music, but that made the gems you found that much more amazing. Like I said earlier, finally having a space to connect to people, even if it was just for a short while, that was good and helped me kind of get my feet under me in a way that it might have been more difficult if I was on my own. So
Well, I know, Matt, did want to give you a little space to talk about yourself, your favorite thing to do, but um, you're still a musician, right? So, and you're still putting
yeah,
stuff out.
yeah. I transitioned from doing mixtapes into DJing. I, like you said, at KSTO, at the radio station at St. Olaf. I was not only a DJ, but a music director for electronic music. It was interesting because at that time, the electronic music scene for Christians wasn't a very big deal. There was one record label putting out some Christian music that was kind of techno adjacent, but it wasn't like very good. So I got very deeply into electronic music shortly after, like in high school, and then at the end of high school into college, especially in college, and then afterwards. So I started writing music late high school, experimenting with programs like Rebirth and Reason, which are like more electronic music kind of generating programs. And yeah, I've been producing ever since. And I've just started releasing techno tracks in the last year. I really thought in the beginning I'd write Christian techno, to be honest with you. And then like I realized like there's really no market for that. Like that's not a thing. And we can, I could talk about why I think that's not a thing for a while, because I think that the way that dance music, you're supposed to interact with it is just like not okay for most Christians because it I don't know, for a lot of reasons. So, but that's my passion is writing techno music.
Mhm.
I want to give people a space to kind of lose themselves, to just get lost in the rhythm and to enjoy. There can be this sort of transcendental, like meditative kind of introspection that can happen when you're in that state.
Mhm.
And I find that really rewarding and fun, even if I don't experience it myself very often. So, yeah.
Well, as the kids say, your music slaps. So I
Thanks.
encourage. Where can people find you to listen to your tunes?
If you go to machinistmusic.com,
Mhm.
Machinnes, music.com, all one word. That will land you on a page where you can go to Spotify, you can go to your favorite shops to buy my music. That's all featured there. So, including my DJ mixes that I put out. So that takes you to the landing page where you can go find find my stuff anywhere that you listen to music. So
Sounds like we have our follow-up episode, why techno never took off in the Christian space. I think we could do a full hour on that. I think we could do it.
I
Go
think
go on
we
Caleb's music
could.
podcast.
Because like you can, just a brief observation. Like first of all, like club culture does have like a lot of drugs involved in it. That doesn't mean that you have to participate, but you will be around other people who are participating, right? There's also a lot of club culture does come from the gay scene, going back to the 70s, you know? And so you are going to be around a lot of people who are expressing themselves. This is a safe space for them to express themselves. And so, like, if you're a Christian, you have these toxic beliefs, you're going into the lion's den. So, like, you are going into where all of this stuff is happening that you might look down on or see as, sinful, where really these people, like, this is their a moment to decompress, right? To be free and to kind of be themselves when they can't be themselves other places. So you're going to see a lot of crazy stuff, not all the time, but
Sure.
regular culture. And then there's also like superficial club culture, which is more about hooking up with people and drinking a lot and stuff like that. So like there is like a commercial level of club culture that can also be, toxic in its own way. But at its core, the fundamental tenets of techno isn't about drugs. It's not about drinking, and it's not about any of that stuff. It's really about the music and about getting lost in the music. And I do think that there's another Christian issue there where, we're taught that if you relax your mind for a moment, the devil will come in, right? Like if you sort of, if you like meditation and stuff like that. Like I've noticed a lot of Christians are very anti-meditation because you'll open up the door for demons to come in or whatever. Like those are teachings and actual books, texts I've read. But I think the opposite is true, that like you can connect to yourself on a deeper level if you relax your biases and you relax kind of the tensions that are kind of like keeping you in this box. You might discover new things about yourself. And like techno can be that gateway of allowing yourself to be kind of lost in the rhythm. It is supposed to be hypnotic. It's supposed to like kind of create this sense of meditation, and you're moving your body. So you're creating this like whole chemical, physical, mental feedback loop that can be really like,
You're giving the whole podcast away.
I am.
Take it off. I think we could do an hour.
All right. I'm happy to talk about it. These are my observations, coming from a perspective of faith, but also being involved in the techno club culture. So
I wonder if you could do all sorts of subgenres. Like, does it work or does it not work? Punk rock, techno. Like you could just go through them and like why it worked at some level but wouldn't work on other levels. Oh man. That's it. That feels like its own podcast in and of itself.
Kind of
I think that'd be really
will
fun.
it waffle, but will it Christian?
Will it Christian?
That's awesome.
Well, our friend Tim said on his episode, like anything that's called Christian besides a person is just a marketing term. It's they tried so hard in the 90s to give us alternatives, and it's interesting you brought that up, just be like, the alternative just simply doesn't work.
You guys know that Stave Saker put out an album like 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, I have it on vinyl.
Okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
I want to make sure that. And then Mark Solomon's still doing stuff.
Yeah.
He does it with Neon Horse now, mostly.
Yeah, I tried listening to their first album. I own it, and it's okay. Like it's
different.
Yeah, it's not my. He's done some different side projects.
Have I listened to them?
No, it's a long time ago. That the first record came out like over 10 years ago.
I should try that.
Yeah, they put out one. They put out an EP this year, and
maybe I'll check
I
it out.
was hit or miss on their. I don't know. There's something about it. Maybe it was just. It's been a long time since I've gotten new Mark Solomon. I'm just was way too a soft spot, but I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really
Mm.
good. It's
Oh, cool.
I don't know, I really enjoyed it. So they do have a new one, the Neon Horse thing. It's
I
just
should
four
check that
songs,
out.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's been interesting listening to their music change too, because I do feel like their stuff has obviously matured. Um, you can kind of read into what you want, I suppose, but a lot of it does feel like it's like subtweeting political issues and stuff like that. Like, kind of just dealing with the whole mess that the church is in right now, or the church, Christianity in general. But I had his autobiography that he wrote like way back in 2006 or something like that. And it was really fascinating to read it because it was all about them coming up as Stavesacre and all like the toxic, weird youth group issues that they would run into and how kids would come up to him and be like, "Oh, you need to repent, blah 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 blah." And he's like, "You don't know who I am, kid." Like, like all the like some of the crazy church experiences that I had, of just judgmentalism, kids probably meaning well. Like I was an asshole then too. Like, at one point I remember coming up and to the drummer because I'd seen them play. Like he was just looking very pale in Minnesota. I was like, "Hey, is he okay? Like, are you okay? You look really pale." And he got pissed at me, rightfully so. He totally should have. I was a dumb kid. It's like one of those things like never meet your heroes kind of thing because you're just gonna make an idiot of yourself. Um, I
Yep.
booked them to play St. Olaf once, and that was an interesting experience too, because yeah, nothing ever goes the way you think it's gonna go. I definitely gave them a copy of one of my demos, and in his book, he's got this fun anecdote about like CDs along the highway road or something like that. They would take these CDs and they would use them as frisbees to try to hit road signs as they pass them by. Because like they just get people passing them like demos all the time, and there's nothing that they can do.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I more or less gave it to them because I was like, well, you've inspired me. This is just more for like a gift to you guys, but I doubt they ever listen to it in retrospect.
I once sent an email to a rapper who had converted to Catholicism. I was trying to ask about that, and I think about that all the time, that if I would ever see him, I'd just be like, "I'm sorry if you ever got that email. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I don't know what I was
I
Oh,
thinking.
I'm so sorry."
yeah, it's like it does. What's cringe for me looking back is like I did all these like messed up things, but like they were coming from a genuine place, right? But it had to do with all the stuff that I'd been taught, like that just, and then it comes out in weird ways because you're not being taught. Like the whole, like, I know you guys talked about it once on one of your podcasts about the like hate the sin, but not the sinner, and how weird that like ended up. Like it created like really weird tensions for me with people that like I knew in high school where I'm like trying to thread that needle
Yeah.
and how toxic that can be to the other person. But like I only really thought about it in retrospect. I will say like the whole LGBTQ thing is really damning. And I was definitely on the sauce, so to speak, of like hate the sin, love the sinner. But what really opened my eyes is like after college, I worked at a safe house, Lutheran Social Services Safe House in St. Paul.
That's right.
And I only worked there for a few months because they ended up closing it because they ran out of funds. But I was essentially overnight shift. So I'd cook dinner and I would be there until like from 6 at night to 8 the next morning. And I would watch over these kids. So it was every kids who were 18 years or younger. And I kid you not, like they're all homeless kids. Almost all of them were LGBTQ, whose parents had kicked them out or had been rejected by their families or who had been told that they weren't like they just didn't feel safe at home anymore and needed a place to go. And
Hmm.
that really tweaked my brain hard. Like it really got me
Mm.
thinking about what are we doing? Like what are we doing what kind of damage are we doing, to real people, to these kids, and
Hmm.
how in the name of righteousness we are endangering people, literally. There's nothing righteous about that, and so
It's not pushing them towards what their parents would perceive as change or conversion or anything like that. It's pushing them farther away.
yeah, you
Mhm.
can't accept who they are,
Yeah.
right? You can't accept who they are, and that creates a break in that relationship. Like there's no you can't thread that needle is what I'm saying.
It feels systematic and celebrated as well. Like, because it's the only answer so many elders at churches give is like,
Yeah.
oh,
Mhm.
you got a kid who's that? Well, tell them it's your way or the highway. And
Tough love time.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
I've got to speak the truth because if I don't speak the truth, I'm not really loving. And then it becomes your only answer. And it's like, well, now, yeah, look, there you go. You've just kicked them out, and that relationship's never going to heal.
Mm-mm.
Oh,
Not unless you're willing to open your mind. And part of that too, I think insular tribes, so to speak, in Christianity, and how I've observed how many churches or how many people, Christians I interact with who don't listen to me, have built their entire faith on a house of cards, where if you pull out one card, like if you tell them, like, no, like you should accept people who are LGBTQ, that like somehow it just crumples their entire worldview about what righteousness is and
Hmm.
going to heaven and all these like myths that they told themselves. They again, it goes back to like you have this kernel of truth and then you built up these layers and layers and layers of around it. You've centered your universe on that and not the kernel inside of it.
Hmm.
Anyway, I could talk
100%.
for a long time about this stuff.
That's
So I'm really glad you guys had me on. Thanks for
we're
letting me
glad to
talk.
have you.
But yeah.
I have one more question for you because this is how we end all of our interviews. If you've listened, you probably know the question that's coming, but is there any like gross, ridiculous story that you all did that you can think of, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or someone got borderline hurt, or that sort of thing? Like, is there anything that stood out to you as pretty audacious that you did in your youth group,
And there were so many dumb things.
or just dumb?
I
Like,
think I don't.
excessively dumb is fine.
It's difficult because like at the time, probably things we did seemed fine, but
Mhm.
there were some stunts like skateboarding or like kind of random stunts that people pulled that
Could cause physical
could have
injury.
caused some physical injury, but
One thing that comes to my mind is I mentioned that when we went on these mission trips, we drove, and like the last year I went, like we had 15 passenger vans, and if we were like 18, they let us drive them. So
wow.
I took a driving shift or
What?
two on that trip, and we went to like Estes Park on the way home. And I was driving on mountain roads at 18 when a 15 passenger van, and I don't think that was a good idea.
Whoa. Well, I
Yeah, at the
suppose
time
adults
it seemed
need to.
fine, but
Yeah, those I've driven those mountain roads. They are intense for any driver, much less a large van full of wild kids and
yeah,
trying to drive
yeah,
it.
yeah. So that
Oof.
wasn't great, but we did it. We lived to tell
Well,
the tale.
Oh,
everyone's
yeah.
alive. So,
We were there this summer, and they've added checkpoints on a lot of mountain roads where they test the heat of your brakes. Because
Oh
if you don't
yeah.
do it right, your brakes can blow out.
Yep.
And so like I think about that, like you probably weren't even thinking about that idea of
Oh
can I
no.
fry my brakes and we all careen to our death. That's crazy.
And I think like maybe it wasn't the full drive. I'm not exactly sure where we went. I was 18. I had no idea where I was. But like it was driving that I had not done before. I know that. And it maybe
mhm.
wasn't like the fully intense, like go to the top of Pikes Peak or anything, but it was, yeah, not a great idea.
Man alive.
Perfect. Perfect.
That challenges our kidnapping story, I think, for like
Oh.
what feels
Yep.
most dangerous. That might be the
Yeah,
most I'm like, I need to go lay down now.
that's
I think maybe some adults in the church were not happy with that.
Steve. Come on, Steve.
We
What
gave
were
him
we
props
thinking?
earlier, now we're taking him back.
That's right. That's right. Well, really appreciate this conversation and the honesty and just being willing to talk about it. It's always interesting to me, well, where people are at because it feels like almost a little bit feels like yesterday, but it was so
Hmm.
long ago.
Hmm.
We've all gotten to different spots, and your journey is always interesting to me. So I appreciate you very much being open and honest about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Um, Anyway, we really appreciate you joining us, and I'm sure we will see you very, very soon.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
Okay,
you.
guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we do want to say thank you to Matt and Katie for taking the time to talk with us and share their youth group experience, and also just to share their honest answers about their opinions on faith and religion and how they've changed in adulthood. It was just great to hear them share from their heart about how those things have changed for them. That's what we hopefully makes this show unique and exciting to listen to, is just to be able to hear somebody talk openly and honestly about their opinions of faith and religion and those sorts of things. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your honest answers. It was great to hear your story. You can find us on Twitter at the handle at SurviveYG. You can also email us at isurviveyouthgroup@gmail.com. If you are interested in being on the show, please let us know on either that Twitter handle or that email address. Again, we've expanded out now. We're no longer just talking to people who attended our youth group, but if you have your own youth group experience from the 90s or the 2000s, we'd love to connect. We'd love to hear about it and just hear how that experience has impacted your life. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. I have had a couple different formats on the show, but right now it's a chance to sit down with somebody and talk about an album that's important to them or an album that they love and celebrate that album on the anniversary of its release date. So once again, that's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
Um, at what point, well, I'm not going to ask that question because I think we've talked about certain events, but um, sorry, trying to figure out where to go from here.
Hmm. Take your time. Can always cut it in the edit.
Oh, we will. Caleb will put it as an outtake at the end.
I do like exposing
You
Scott
do.
in the outtakes.
Yeah, that's true. You gotta wait for the end.
One of our shows recently, it was the outtakes were all just me messing up the outro.
Yeah.
It was like a minute and a half of like I couldn't get it right. And I was like, oh my gosh.
That was him recording by himself.
Yeah,
talking
I
to
was
himself.
such a fail. Oh my gosh.
Well, I guess I'll ask this.